Instead of just being able to answer one specific question, if we take it and if we start out with the standard form formula, if we follow the same steps with these letters, then we should find something that answers every single quadratic to get its roots. And that's what I'm going to be showing you just now. Okay, so this is going to be weird. I wouldn't expect you to be able to do this on your own, but someday in your math career, you're going to be able to do this. Come up with these steps on your own. It's just a bit of problem solving and understanding what's actually going on in the math. Okay? So, let's just assume that we can't factor this the way that it is. We're going to have to rearrange some things so that it works out. So I'm going to give myself some space to add an extra number between the bx and the c. And let me add some space on the other side because whatever I put here, I'm going to have to balance out by putting on the other side. Here's where the first complication starts to happen. If there was a number here, in the question we already answered earlier, there wasn't one. It was just the number 1. But if this a was something other than 1, then our first step would be we would need to factor that out. So let's factor out the a. If I take the a off of x squared, then that would just make it x squared. But this, I want all of these three things, everything before the c, to be grouped together. If this bx doesn't have an a to give, I mean to factor an a out, there's no a here, then what we'll have to do is we will have to come up with a way so that if I multiplied a back, then it would cancel out so that there was no a because there originally wasn't. What would we need to change b times x to b so that if we multiplied a to it, the a's cancel out? We would have to divide by a. We would have to plan ahead by dividing by a. By planning ahead and dividing by a, then if we distribute the a back to these two terms, we would get ax squared plus bx. And the a on the bottom would cancel with this a that multiplies it. Then we're going to leave a blank space. Plus c equals a blank space. Now we can find this blank space. This blank space comes from taking this term, that coefficient, and dividing it by 2 and then squaring it. That's the trick that they found from whenever they're factoring. They did enough questions to know that if you take half of the middle term and then square it, it's going to make it so that it's a perfect square. B over a, and we're going to divide it by 2, which would be the same thing as b over 2a. And then, once we get this b over 2a, we're going to square that and put it right here. b over 2a squared. And one last thing is, if we just randomly came up with this b over 2a right here, we're going to have to counter this out by putting a b over 2a squared on the right side. But since this b over 2a is inside of a parentheses with an a, we're also going to have to throw an extra a over here. I understand this is a lot for you, but I just really want to show you the next, well, this is probably like 10 steps or 20 steps above where you're at in math. But it's affecting what you're doing right now. So once we've added this new factor here, this set that we have in parentheses is going to factor perfectly to be x plus b over 2a squared with that a on the outside plus c equals, and then I'm going to distribute this through. This power of 2 is going to go to the b, to the 2, and the a. So that's a times b squared divided by 4a squared. We have an a on top and an a on the bottom. These are going to cancel out and leave you with b squared divided by 4a on the bottom. And on the left side is a parentheses x plus b over 2a squared plus c. We're getting close to the end. We're really close. All we have to do is subtract this c. We're trying to solve for x, so we're going to subtract the c, and then we're going to divide by a. Okay, so let me just rewrite this left side, and then I'll worry about the right side and simplifying that. X plus b over 2a squared equals, I need to subtract this top part before I divide by a. But since c does not have any a's, and it doesn't have a 4, I need to get these two things to have a common denominator. To make this c have the same denominator as the 4a, I'm going to have to multiply by what it's missing. It's missing a 4 and an a on top, and a 4 and an a on the bottom. When I do c times 4a divided by 4a, when I do this multiplication, all that's going to happen is I'm going to have 4ac on the top of that fraction and 4a on the bottom of that fraction. Once you have the same denominator, you are allowed to subtract the tops. The top is b squared minus 4ac. So let me write that as one fraction together. b squared minus 4ac divided by 4a divided by a. Let me rewrite this so that this a, instead of being another fraction bar, is going to look like this instead. If I'm dividing by a, that's the same thing as multiplying by 1 over a. Dividing by a number is the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal. So then, whenever you're multiplying with fractions, all you do is top times top and bottom times bottom. If I multiply this top part by 1, it's not going to change. If I multiply 4a times a, the only change is that it's going to be 4a squared. And this is going to be what I write down here. b squared minus 4ac divided by 4a squared. We're really close to being done with this, and there's just a few more steps to go. I'm going to go back to the electric whiteboard so that way I have some more space without erasing any of this. This is where we left off in the last step. X plus b divided by 2a squared equals b squared minus 4ac divided by 4a squared. We're trying to solve this for x. To get that x, in the end, we'll need to square root both sides. A square root cancels out with a square, leaving me with x plus b over 2a equals the square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 4a squared. I'm going to write that as, instead of one giant square root, I'm going to have the top be the top, and I'm going to have the square root apply to the bottom. Square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by square root of 4a squared. We are extremely close to being done. You can practically see the quadratic formula from here. Let's simplify this bottom part. The square root of 4a squared. Well, the square root of 4 is 2, and the square root of a squared, the square root of a squared would just be a. Now, all that we're going to do next is, if we want x by itself, we need to get rid of this plus b divided by 2a by subtracting it from both sides. And there is one thing that I forgot. Whenever I do this square root, in the square root, I'm going to get a plus and minus sign. So the plus and minus sign comes from, whenever you have something that was squared before, once you square root that thing, you're going to have a positive answer and a negative answer because of that. So what we're looking at is plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a minus b divided by 2a. Look at these denominators. these already have the same denominator, so that means I can combine them to be one fraction, divided by 2a. Here we have a plus and minus, b squared minus 4ac under a square root, and then right here is a negative b. There's your quadratic equation. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and I hope that you do realize that someday you can do this yourself.